The train rocked gently beneath me as I stared out the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. I couldn't tell which were my tears, and which were just reflections of the sky's own sorrow. 3 months had passed since the accident, but time hadn't dulled the pain. If anything, it had sharpened it, like a blade being honed against stone. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Mom checking in again. I ignored it. What could I say that I hadn't already? Yes, I'm eating. No, I'm not sleeping well. Yes, I'm taking my medication. The truth was, I was barely functioning. This train journey was the first time I'd left my apartment in 2 weeks, and it was only because my therapist had practically ordered me to visit my sister in Portland. You need to reconnect with people who love you, she had said, her eyes soft with concern. Isolation only feeds grief, Emma. So here I was, on the 3:15 to Portland, having a breakdown in public. I wiped my eyes with my sleeve, hoping no one had noticed. But of course someone had. There was always someone watching. I felt the weight of eyes on me from across the aisle. Sorry, I mumbled, not looking up. Allergies. You look so much like her, a man's voice said, soft but clear enough to cut through the ambient noise of the train. My head snapped up. The man sitting across from me was perhaps in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind, wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a tweed jacket that had seen better days and clutched a book, Steinbeck's East of Eden, in weathered hands. Excuse me? My voice came out hoarse. He looked embarrassed now, as if he hadn't meant to speak aloud. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. It's just, for a moment there, you reminded me of someone I used to know. I should have let it go. I should have nodded politely and gone back to staring out the window. But there was something in his voice, a note of such genuine melancholy, that resonated with my own grief. Who? I asked. He hesitated, then set his book down on the empty seat beside him. My daughter, Caroline. She had the same way of looking out windows on rainy days, like she was searching for something just beyond the glass. Had? She passed. Away. 6 years ago, next month. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I knew the weight of those words now, how inadequate they were, yet how necessary. Thank you. He smiled, a gentle curve of lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. I didn't mean to disturb you. Please go back to your thoughts. But I didn't want to go back to my thoughts. My thoughts were a dark room I'd been locked in for months. This conversation, as strange and sudden as it was, felt like someone had cracked open a door, letting in a sliver of light. I'm Emma, I said, extending my hand across the aisle. He looked surprised but pleased. Henry Caldwell. We shook hands, and I noticed a simple gold wedding band on his finger. It looked well worn, like something that had become part of him over decades. Are you heading to Portland too? I asked. No, just as far as Salem. I teach literature at Willamette University. Hence the Steinbeck. I nodded toward his book. Actually, this is just personal reading. But yes, I do teach Steinbeck in my American Lit course. He picked up the book again, running his thumb along its spine. Do you read much? I used to. The words came out more bitterly than I'd intended. There were so many things I used to do, but not anymore. I shrugged. It's hard to focus these days. Henry nodded as if this made perfect sense. Grief does that. Fragments the attention. Makes it difficult to stay present for more than a few moments at a time. The word grief hung in the air between us. Acknowledgement of the invisible weight we both carried. I felt exposed, but also, strangely, relieved. There was something freeing about sitting across from someone who could name the thing that was consuming me without flinching away from it. How did you know? I asked. That I was That I'd lost someone? I recognized the look, he said simply. I've seen it in the mirror enough times. May I ask who it was? My fiancé, Alex. The name still caught in my throat. Car accident. 3 months ago. Henry didn't offer platitudes or ask for details. He just nodded, his eyes full of a compassion that could only come from understanding. 3 months is still very raw. Does it ever get better? I hadn't meant to ask the question. It had escaped me like a breath I'd been holding too long. Henry considered this, looking past me out the window at the passing landscape. Not better, exactly. Different. The grief changes shape. Sometimes, it's a stone in your pocket, always there, but you can carry it. Other times, it's a tidal wave that knocks you off your feet when you least expect it. He was the first person who hadn't promised me that time would heal everything, that I'd move on eventually. His honesty was refreshing. Tell me about Caroline, I said, surprising myself again. A look crossed Henry's face. Pain, yes, but also a flicker of pleasure at the invitation to speak his daughter's name, to bring her into the present moment. She was brilliant, stubborn as hell. She was studying marine biology at University of Washington when she got sick, leukemia. She fought it for 2 years before he trailed off, then rallied. She loved the ocean, said it was the only thing big enough to contain all her questions about the world. She sounds amazing. She was. And Alex? No one had asked me to talk about Alex in weeks. People tiptoed around his name as if saying it might shatter me. Maybe it would have before. But now, sitting across from this stranger who carried his own grief with such quiet dignity, I found I wanted to speak about Alex, to make him real again in the space between us. He was an architect, brilliant with structures, with seeing how things could fit together in ways no one else imagined. He could look at an empty lot and already see the building that should be there. I smiled, remembering. He laughed at all my bad jokes. He sang in the shower, terribly. He made the best scrambled eggs I've ever tasted, but couldn't bake to save his life. The train lurched slightly as it rounded a bend, and I realized I'd been leaning forward in my seat, animated in a way I hadn't been since the accident. He sounds like someone worth missing, Henry said gently. He is. I looked down at my hands, at the engagement ring I still wore. But sometimes I wonder if I'm remembering him accurately, or if I don't know, creating a saint in my memory. Henry chuckled softly. Caroline and I fought like cats and dogs sometimes. She could be self-righteous, impatient. She'd get so focused on being right that she'd forget to be kind. His eyes grew distant. I miss even the arguments now. Yes, I said, feeling understood. Exactly. We fell into a comfortable silence then, the train's rhythmic clacking a soothing backdrop. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. I realized I had stopped crying sometime during our conversation. May I ask you something personal, Henry? He nodded. How's your wife? After losing Caroline, I mean. I knew from the way he spoke and the wedding ring that he was married, but I hadn't heard him mention a spouse. A shadow passed over his face. Diana, she couldn't bear to stay. Not after Caroline. We'd been having problems for years, but losing our daughter was the final blow. She moved to Arizona about a year after the funeral. New job, new life. We're still legally married, but he twisted the gold band on his finger. Some griefs you carry together, others drive you apart. I'm sorry, I said again, feeling the inadequacy of the words. Don't be. We each cope in our own way. Diana needed to start fresh somewhere without memories. I needed to stay where I could feel close to Caroline. He smiled ruefully. Neither of us was wrong. The train's intercom crackled to life, announcing that we'd be arriving in Salem in 15 minutes. Henry glanced at his watch, then at me. Will you be all right? The rest of your journey, I mean. I considered the question seriously. Yes, I said finally. I think I will be. He nodded, satisfied. Good. That's good. As the train began to slow for Salem, Henry reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. If you ever want to talk, or if you find yourself unable to read but wanting to, give me a call. I host a small reading group for people who've experienced loss. Nothing formal, just a space where grief is welcome at the table. I took the card, turning it over in my fingers. Professor Henry Caldwell, Department of English Literature, Willamette University. There was an email address and phone number. Thank you, I said, tucking it into my purse. I might do that. The train pulled into Salem Station with a hiss of brakes. Henry gathered his things unhurriedly, sliding his book into a worn leather messenger bag. It was a pleasure meeting you, Emma, despite the circumstances. He extended his hand again. I shook it, holding on perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Likewise, Henry. He nodded, then made his way down the aisle toward the exit. Just before stepping off the train, he turned back and caught my eye once more. He didn't say anything else, just gave a small wave before disappearing onto the platform. The train pulled away, continuing its journey north. I turned my attention back to the window, but I was seeing the landscape differently now. The conversation with Henry had altered something in me, not healed exactly, but shifted, like a shard of glass being turned so that it reflected light instead of simply cutting. I reached for my phone and finally read my mother's text. Let me know when you'll arrive. Love you. I typed back. On schedule. 5:30. Love you too. Then, after a moment's hesitation, I added, met someone interesting on the train. I'll tell you about it. I pressed send and watched as the message delivered, a small act of connection that would have seemed impossible just hours before. The train journeyed onward through the Oregon countryside, and I realized I was no longer crying. Instead, I was thinking about Henry's reading group, wondering what books they discussed, how they created space for their grief while still living their lives. For the first time in months, I was curious about something. I pulled Henry's card from my purse again and studied it. Then I took out my phone and added his contact information. I wasn't ready to call him yet, but someday, perhaps sooner than I'd have thought possible this morning, I might be. 6 months later, I stood outside a small brick building on Willamette's campus, gathering my courage. Inside, Henry's reading group would be discussing The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. He'd emailed me their reading list after I'd finally reached out 3 months ago, but this was the first time I'd actually come to a meeting. My hand trembled slightly as I pushed open the door. The room inside was warm and bathed in soft light. A circle of chairs held about 10 people of various ages. Henry was there, arranging cups near a coffee maker. He looked up as I entered, surprise giving way to a warm smile of recognition. Emma, he said, coming forward to greet me. I'm so glad you came. I almost didn't, I admitted. But you did, he said simply. That's what matters. He introduced me to the group, a widow in her 70s, a man who'd lost his brother to suicide, parents who'd lost children, children who'd lost parents, ordinary people carrying extraordinary grief, yet still finding ways to live, to connect, to make meaning. As we settled into our discussion of Didion's memoir of loss, I felt something inside me begin to thaw, like a frozen river at the first hint of spring. These people understood the language of grief I'd been speaking for months. They didn't flinch from the hard truths, but they also held space for moments of unexpected joy, dark humor, even hope. After the meeting, Henry walked me to my car. What did you think? He asked. It helped, I said. More than I expected. "Will, you come back next month?" I nodded. "Yes. And I've started reading again. Not much, just a few pages before bed. But it's something. It's a lot," he corrected gently. "Every small step matters." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment. The campus was quiet in the evening light, students having retreated to dormitories and apartments. "I never thanked you properly," I said, finally. "For that day on the train." "No thanks needed. We're fellow travelers, that's all." "Still, if you hadn't spoken to me that day..." I trailed off, unsure how to express what his simple act of connection had meant. "Someone once reached out to me when I was at my lowest," Henry said. "A complete stranger who noticed my grief and didn't look away. I've tried to pay that forward ever since." As I drove home that night, I thought about chains of kindness, how one person's compassion might ripple outward in ways they never see. I thought about Alex, about what he would think of the person I was becoming. Not the same as before, but not entirely different either. Grief had changed me, but it hadn't ended me. The next morning, I woke early and did something I hadn't done since the accident. I went for a run. Just a short one, around my neighborhood. But as my feet hit the pavement and my lungs burned with the effort, I felt strangely, unexpectedly alive. When I returned home, sweaty and breathing hard, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. For a split second, I didn't recognize my own reflection. There was color in my cheeks, light in my eyes that had been absent for so long. "You look so much like her," I whispered to my reflection, echoing Henry's words from that day on the train. But I wasn't thinking of some stranger's daughter. I was thinking of myself, of the woman I used to be, before grief hollowed me out. She wasn't entirely gone after all. Beneath the layers of loss and pain, she had been waiting. I'm not going to tell you that everything changed overnight, or that grief no longer visits me. It does. Sometimes as that tidal wave Henry described, sometimes as the stone in my pocket. But I've learned to carry it differently now. I've learned that it's possible to hold both grief and joy, memory and presence, what was lost and what might still be found. If you're reading this and carrying your own grief, know that you're not alone on that train. Someone else understands the language you're speaking. Someone else sees you. And maybe someday, when you least expect it, someone will look at you and say something that cracks open a door, letting in just enough light for you to find your way forward again. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a chance encounter that changed something for you. Sometimes the briefest connections can have the most profound impact on our lives. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more stories about the unexpected moments that shape us. And remember, even on your darkest days, you're never truly alone on the journey.